Hello, I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. Thank you for joining me. I'm in Romans chapter 15 today, and we are looking at how God stabilizes believers. And in particular, beginning back about chapter 12 here in Romans, Paul has been looking at how believers get along, and probably more particularly, how believers who are mature and are stable, the role they can play in being used by God to help other believers become stable and not get in the way. And so here in Romans chapter 15, he says, now we who are strong, making a distinction between types of believers, ought to bear the weaknesses of those without strength and not to please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor. In this context, that would be another believer, because that's what he's been talking about, for his good, for his edification, that is to build him up. You ought to be thinking about what can I be doing that actually helps him grow, helps him become stronger and more stable, rather than just pursuing what I'm most interested in. 4, verse 3, for even Christ did not please himself. Now, we talked about this yesterday, and we looked at some examples. In fact, we went over here to John chapter 6. I'm going to come back to this, and this is stated a few times in the Gospel of John. But Jesus is speaking here to a crowd of Jews that have followed him back across the lake after he fed them the day before. He fed the 5,000. They have now followed him back across the lake, and he's talking with them, and he says, for I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. So he wasn't here just to please himself. He was here to do the will of God. The will of the Father, in particular, is what we want to say. Because Jesus himself is also God, as Jesus is emphasizing his being a man. But as he came down here and as he operated in this world, he was doing the will of the Father. Now, he goes back here and Paul quotes from Psalm 69, and he says, that Christ did not please himself, but as it is written. And so he's going to make a comparison. This as it is written uses this kathos preposition, which would be katahos in the Greek. You put these together, combine these two, we have this contracted adverb here, and it's saying according as. And according as meaning he's making a comparison. So he's not saying that this is a direct, as he's looking at this for us, a direct fulfillment, but he's looking at an idea. And so we'll chase this down for a little bit, and hopefully it'll help you understand what Christ did in doing the Father's will. It says, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. Now, we don't use the word reproach a great deal in modern English, but the idea is to insult, to taunt, to say, to ridicule, or throw blame on somebody in a situation because you're really upset with them. You don't like them, or you don't like something that they've done. So that's this idea of reproach. And the reproaches of those who, notice what it says, have reproached you, or taunted, or blamed you, or ridiculed you. The ridicule was really being directed at God the Father. But as the Son is doing the Father's will, the people don't like him. They don't like the works the Father gave the Son to do, and they don't like the things that the Father gave the Son to say. And in doing the Father's will, then, they really are hating the Father. And Jesus indicates that later in the Gospel of John. And so as a result, they hated him. And he says, those reproaches, those insults fell on me. I want to go to Psalm 69, and in the middle of this psalm, and it says largely what we heard, for the zeal for your house has consumed me. Literally, consumed. Guess what? In the Hebrew, it's the word eat. It has eaten me up. And the taunts, this is the 2020 edition of the New American Standard, they have taunts. Again, ridicule, okay, this idea, this haraf, noun here in Hebrew, the taunts, the ridicule, the reproaches of those who have reproached, same thing, reproached you, now as a verb, they've fallen on me. Now, you might be familiar with this, for the zeal for your house has consumed me. And so I want to go back to John 2, and I want to see what happens. We have this statement. It says his disciples, this is John 2, verse 17, his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has consumed me. But to go back in the context and see what he's talking about, it says in verse 14, and he, Jesus, found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge. You don't know what that is? It's like a whip of cords, and he drove them. So he's actually whipping people. This, everybody thinks Jesus is this always nice, meek, kind guy. Well, a lot of times he was really, really compassionate with people. But in this situation, these people needed what they were getting. And so he took a whip and he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers. Can you imagine that? They've got tables where they've got money, and it might be in different cups and different things and stacked up. And he's tipping those tables over and throwing them. All that money goes spilling all over the place. And he poured out the coins of the money changer to overturn the tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my father's house a place of business, or an emporium, place of selling things. And his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house, this is the temple, has consumed me. And of course, then the Jews want to know, what sign do you do to show us your authority for doing this? In other words, who are you that you think you can come in here and handle all this? And verse 19, Jesus is going to then talk to them about destroying his physical temple, because that's, in the end, that's going to be one of the things that's going to irritate these people. They're going to be very upset to the point that they are going to put Jesus to death for this act among many other acts that he did. But it's interesting that this is the one that is quoted in Romans 15. It's quoted for the activity that the Jews did in really as a basis of putting him to death, because they reproached him, they insulted him, they were hostile and very angry at the Father. That's the way they were treating it, by selling stuff up there at the temple. And so they likewise do this to Jesus Christ. Now, what does that have to do with this? Well, it's because these were the works that God the Father gave him to do. So that means that when he goes to the temple and he overturns those things, it's not just that he in his human nature just becomes indignant with them and it overturns tables and drives these people out. He's doing this because this is one of the things that the Father wants him to do. Because these people have taken the temple, which was to be a house of prayer, and turned it into as Jesus says likewise, or elsewhere, a den of thieves, a place to make money. And he uses that as an example to say Christ did not please himself. So when he's doing that, when he's taking the reproach, when those people insult him because of what he does at the temple, he doesn't look at that and say, oh, no. This was all about God the Father. This wasn't really me. It's just what he gave me to do. No, he takes it. He takes their insults. He takes their blame. He takes their ridicule. And eventually he'll take that to the point that he'll go to a cross and die. And it starts with his doing the will of the Father. And it's a good encouragement to stop and think the things that he was doing and what he endured, that it was ultimately for a purpose that God had. He was in agreement to this purpose. He's part of the Godhead. But he's doing that will that the Father had for him to do. And he didn't please himself. And likewise us, we're going to sometimes go through some things where there's things we're going to have to shoulder that may not always be pleasant, may not always be fun, but guess what? They're what God wants for us to do. And he wants us to be concerned more about somebody else than about ourselves and what we get out of it. And that's a way that we can be helpful in helping other believers that are weak, that have issues, to not be stumbled, so that they can grow and become stable. And they, as well as we, can have then a good day in the Lord. Thank you again for joining me today.